Welcome to another Club Rum video. Please consider subscribing to the channel and hit the bell icon to get notified of future videos.
So hello everyone, I'm Johnny from Club Rum. Welcome to this session with Richard Seale from Foursquare Distillery. We've called this session Doing Things Right. I do think that most of you have tasted some of Richard's rum. It's hard to miss any of his rums, of course, being such a prolific distillery and releasing so much stuff yearly, and you know, being voted gold standard rum or gold medal rums. He's won even as a distiller. Richard, again, a very warm welcome on your birthday, and please take it away.
Right. Well, thank you for having me. It's good. We can still, even in the COVID era, we can still reach people and have these tasting sessions. It's a little strange. I do have a few pictures and stuff I can show, but it'll be mainly sort of conversation, and I'm very happy for you to ask questions, because the main thing about these sessions really is, it's for you guys. It's just, a small group. You're online. You have a direct contact, so it should be about what you guys want to find out a little bit more about us and Foursquare, and it's good for us to have the feedback and stuff. It is a tasting. I don't have the rums in front of me, but it is a tasting. I believe you have all the rums in front of you. You have them in how they were sent to you, right? I mean, so my feeling is go ahead and crack open the first one, which is the RL Seale 10.
Yes.
And have a taste. And that's probably a good opportunity for me to explain a little bit about who we are and who is RL Seale. And by all means, pop open the Dorley's XO as well. And the reason is these two brands are very old Barbados brands, the Dorley's in particular. And they were both named after the original proprietors of their business. So rum actually is very similar to Scotch whiskey in the sense of historically the separation between distiller and blender. So when you think of Scotch whiskey brands, the blending brands, like Johnny Walker and Dewar's and all those, they were historically separate. And I think people think in the modern era sort of think this strange, but you have to realize that historically spirits were agricultural products. I mean, rum was an agricultural product. It's made on a sugar estate. And the blenders was how these commodities went to market. And the blenders often, were grocers, merchant traders. They were people who brought food and drink products to the market. Martin Dorley started in 1920. My great-grandfather, R.L. Seale, started, we officially take in 1926. He may have started a bit earlier, but the business was incorporated in 1926. And so these were merchant, as they say, merchant blenders. They bought from the distilleries and did their blends, bottled it, and brought it to market. This era, as they say, really came as rum, became more commercialized as a bottled product late 19th century, early 20th century. And there were many of these merchant blenders, and you can see it over in rum, like if you think of Jamaica, for example, you think of Fred Meyer's merchant blender, or you think of J. Ray, a nephew. I mean, that's why you have two names, the J. Ray, a nephew, and an Appleton. And it's the same reason why you have two names at RL Seale and Foursquare. So J. Ray eventually acquired the Appleton estate. Well, in our case, we acquired the Foursquare estate. Now, in our case, the Foursquare estate was closed. It's a very old estate, goes right back to the 17th century. In that period, there were the whole area was called Foursquare, and there were multiple sugar operations, sugar works in the area. We can identify the single estate that became Foursquare from about the early 1700s. And Foursquare, by the 20th century, Foursquare separated off from from the estate and became a dedicated sugar factory. So instead of just milling the cane of its own estate, it milled the cane of multiple estates in the area. This was part of the modernization of the industry in the early 20th century. So Foursquare continued as a sugar factory until 1988 when it closed. Barbados has seen a great shrinkage in its sugar industry. In 1970, for example, there were 10 sugar factories. That was a big rationalization then. Now there's only one. So Foursquare is one of those casualties. In the 20th century, Foursquare just did sugar and molasses. I hadn't done rum since the late 19th century. So it closed in 88, as I say, this old estate, and we purchased it in 94, refurbished it, and started rum there again in 96. So naturally, we migrated our brands, RL Seale and Martin Dorley, to Foursquare. So obviously, all of the rum today under the RL Seale or Martin Dorley label. Let me just take a step back. We acquired the Martin Dorley label in 1993. So Martin Dorley, is a little bit older than us, started in 1920, was a much bigger brand than us through the sort of 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. Very prestigious brand. Martin Dorley was quite a sort of successful spirits business. But long story short, it merged with another merchant blender company in the early 70s. And as I say, long story short, the brand went on the decline. And in the early 90s, the parent company that owned it and other brands was in financial trouble. And they were selling off some valuable assets. And we took that opportunity to buy the Martin Dorley brand. So we've owned it since 93. But the Martin Dorley brand is actually quite important to us because the Martin Dorley brand was a very prestigious Barbados brand. And it was a brand, one of what we think it was the first brand actually exported and bottled from Barbados. So actually acquiring that brand was a great impetus for us to be thinking about exporting, thinking about building stocks. And those decisions then led to, the decision to acquire the old Foursquare estate and refurbish it, because that was necessary if we were going to achieve these other objectives. One of the things that's happened in the spirits industry, you've seen it in Scotch whiskey in the last 50 years, you've seen it now in rum and more recently, is some of these historic distilleries which traditionally supplied blender brands now have their own brands. So a lot of people don't realize how young some Scotch whiskey brands are, as in the distillery brands. And of course, I think you guys know of things like Hampden and Worthy Park, very old distilleries, but now put in their names on a label. And Foursquare is no different in that respect. So even though we established Foursquare to supply these brands, we eventually, of course, started to release rums under the Foursquare label. So that's how, in a nutshell, how the Seale family runs a distillery called Foursquare and sells rum called RL Seale and Martin Dorley. We don't have on the tasting tonight, but if you know, one of our other products is the John D. Taylor's Velvet Falernum. Again, John D. Taylor was one of a merchant blender of the past. So another of these merchant blenders. There are many of them. And we actually sell some in Barbados that we don't export. So if you come to Barbados, you'll see some old brands that we still produce. So that's sort of in a nutshell how we came about and how we came to export. We first started exporting in the early 2000s. And the Dorley's XO that you're tasting, we actually had developed that for the local market. because the more like many parts of the world, local rum was premiumizing a bit. There was more opportunities for premium rum, so we developed Doherty's XO. But it turned out to be perfect timing because we just started export, and so we were able to take a fairly interesting product in the Doherty's XO with the sherry cask use, and it really was very, very successful for us. It really was, you know, the key most successful item for us in those early years, and certainly in those early first rum shows and stuff like that. So I often describe Doherty's XO as kind of the rum that put us a little bit on the map. So that's why I was very happy to open up with RL Seale and the Doherty's XO, because they both have an important role. RL Seale obviously being the original brand, not in that version, not the 10-year-old. The 10-year-old is more modern, but the RL Seale brand. But also the RL Seale brand really represents well the classic modern Barbados style. And when I say modern, I mean the last sort of 100+ years of Barbados rum. So in other words, influenced by the introduction of things like column still and added yeast and all these things, it really sort of crystallized the modern Barbados style of rum. So the RL Seale 10-year-old very much represents that. What we did with the Doherty's XO was we sort of reintroduced the use of sherry cask. So in Barbados, in rum making generally, it's a refill cask spirit. Say in contrast to something like Kentucky bourbon or you know, French cognac, which you know, have a new oak is a big part of that process. Of course, bourbon is exclusively no oak. Scotch whiskey and rum are refill, historically refill, and that's because we don't have our own cooperage sources. We don't have our own forests. We don't have our own source of trees. So historically, whiskey and rum have always been in refill casks, and one of those refill casks, of course, is sherry, because of course things like sherry and Madeira were immensely popular sort of back in the 18th and 19th centuries. So so historically there was that, but in the modern era it was pretty much the American ex-bourbon. Because a little bit like with Scotch whiskey, I mean, you know, refill casks were used for the simple reason that that's how things like sherry came into the island. It came into the island in bulk. So of course, once sherry no longer came into the island in bulk, or Madeira, or port, or cognac, obviously the use of those casks stopped. So what we did with the Doherty's XO was to, you know, sort of reach out and for the first time import, you know, empty sherry casks. So those are the first two.
Richard, a couple of questions, if I may.
Yeah.
So I have one question from Ruben. I'm not sure if I follow the question, maybe you will. He says, as a family-run business, would you consider yourself more marketing focused or actual blending? So I think I know the answer to that question, but.
So my day-to-day is really on the distilling side and maturation side. My day-to-day is not on the blending side. So I don't do the batches of like Doherty's XO or RL Seale. Those are well-established blends handed down, you know, for years. So they're produced that. I would only be involved in the blending when we're doing a new product. Other than that, my day-to-day role is distilling and maturation. So that's the bulk of my role.
Okay.
I'm obviously involved in marketing for the simple reason that we don't do much marketing. I mean, Foursquare really doesn't have any marketing.
This is marketing.
Yeah, exactly. This is marketing. Yeah. So the Foursquare doesn't have any marketing, but the Doherty's has marketing, and but you know, it's very small. So yeah, so that's that. But as a family-run business, what tends to happen is you tend to be involved in everything. So, you know, we don't really have a marketing department. We don't have a marketing person. you know, all the label designs are done in-house. So yeah, I mean, it's a family business. Everything is a small. If you come and see us, it's a very small. We're a very small crew. We don't really have, you know, we don't have a legal department. You know, I have to review all the legal stuff. Um, I mean, right now I'm working on our trademarks for China. So I mean, I'm doing all that because we don't have a. I mean, we have like we're hiring you know, lawyers to do the registration, but I mean, saying it's me and the company, not we don't have a lawyer in the company. But so as a family business, yes, you tend to have a finger in every single pie. But my day to day is really distillation and blending and maturation, not blending. No.
So a couple of other questions. I think most people know what the RL Seale bottle looks like. Is there a nice story you want to tell us about?
Yeah, what happened is my father saw a similar bottle in Arminet. It's actually a much more bent bottle. He liked it. So we explored getting our own mold. We actually did actually through mutual friends ask them permission just to be safe, even though our bottle is quite different. It was inspired by that bottle. And but what that bottle really is meant to imitate is a leather bottle, the old leather bottle. So that was the and what I like about it, and so the Dorley's bottles as well, is we try to have bottles that obviously have a little bit of distinctiveness over a standard, you know, bottle, but are still easy to handle. You know, sometimes everyone gets a little too creative with their bottles, and then, you know, they get things that don't fit in. They don't fit in bartender, you know, bar rails, or they're, you know, they're easy to spill. And so you will notice with our bottles, whether it's the RL Seale or the Dorleys, or, you know, even the Valier Black bottles we do, they're pretty, you know, they're distinctive, but they're not silly.
Yeah.
So so I like that in the RL Seale bottle, in that it's very distinctive, but yet it handles very easy. So that's nice, you know. That's not always easy to get a bottle that's distinctive yet handles handles pretty easy. So that was that behind the bottle. I see a question: is that Europe doesn't get a 12-year-old?
Yeah. Why?
Yes. We decided to introduce the 12-year-old in the US because we didn't have a national distribution. It's a bit complicated. It's probably a little bit hard for me to explain, but we don't have a national distribution on the 10-year-old. And we didn't want to change that arrangement with the 10-year-old. So we launched a 12-year-old to have a national distribution. We would see how things go, but, you know, at the end of the day, when you're dealing with rums of 10 or 12 or certainly 14, you're always dealing with finite quantities. So, you know, you still need to be very cautious. So when we launched the 12-year, we didn't necessarily want to, you know, we still want to keep our focus on the demand for 12-year-old on our Dorley's 12. So it's more about just balancing supply and demand, doing what was necessary for the US market. It's a little bit complicated. It's a little bit hard for me to explain. It's a little bit one of these sort of internal machinations. But there is a reason. Yes, I've done a terrible job of explaining.
I'm not sure we're satisfied with that answer, but okay, we'll take it.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe it's not a good reason, but there is a reason.
No. So there's one more question. As you're in charge of maturation, someone asked, let's see, Mario, I think, who asked if you plan on releasing a 20 or 25-year-old rum in the future.
Yes. So you know, there's no question that one of my objectives is to continue to age rums. And of course, try to, you know, aging for us is, you know, the single most powerful tool in producing, you know, good rum. And it doesn't mean that, you know, aging can go wrong. Obviously, you can make mistakes, but we certainly see it as a tool in which we intend to leverage as much as possible. And so we've done as much as 16. Our oldest rum still in cask is now 17 because it's 2004. But yes, the plan is, and I have, you know, so like the 2004, that may not go too much older, but I have some rums that are younger now that I foresee that could become the 18 and the 20 and the 22. So not necessarily, so that means you have to wait a little longer. It's not probably going to be, you know, for the 20 or 25, but because it's always a challenge when you put rum down. You are putting rum down knowing what your market is. So you're putting rum down based on the fact that, you know, you're probably going to not keep it much beyond 10, 12 years old. So the kind of rum that you would put down that you want to keep for 20 or 25 is likely to be a different distillate, different barrels. So that's why I have younger rums that I intend to keep older than some of my oldest rums, which I'll probably end up bottling sooner rather than later. So while logically you might think, oh, why don't you make the 2004 the 25-year-old? 2004 will make a fantastic 25-year-old, but I have some younger rums, you know, sort of 07, 08, 09, 10 that I think will make an even better 25-year-old. And so therefore the logic will be, you know, sell the other ones when they're in their prime and then wait for the other ones to come to their prime. So
yeah, so it has to do
but
with,
yes, the mission is absolutely to age long rums for sure.
yeah, so your the reason why you will tend to go this way, bottling older stuff now and putting rums away in the recent years and bottling them maybe 20 years later is the different marks of the rum, and also I think
Yes, exactly.
the barrel
and
also the barrel and the cask, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, I mean, you know, if you taste an old rum and it's not very good, you know, then it's been done badly. So it doesn't mean that you know, one of the most annoying things is to hear that rum doesn't age, or even more annoying that, you know, you have to age rum in Europe if you want to age it a long time. I mean, it's a lot of nice nonsensical statements. So yeah, no, the mission is if you want to create a, you know, 18, 20, 22-year-old rum, you have to set out to create that. You have to have the right rum for that and the right cask for that. It's not just a case of taking the same rum that you might sell at 2 or 3 years old and just leaving it in the same cask. That may not be the best strategy.
Right.
But absolutely, which is, you know, an interesting question. I mean, for example, you know, when you look back, you know, the famous Puerto Rican chemist Rafael Arroyo, I mean, it's always very important when you read the writings of chemists to realize they're chemists and they're not rum makers. And, you know, Arroyo saw aging as a means to an end. You know, he used to call it curing. So in other words, you know, you reach the point of palatability and that's it. Put it in the bottle, drink it. So the notion of going exploring 10 and 12 and 15 was not really, it was like, well, what's the point, you know, or sort of thing. But today, you know, we drink spirits neat and we want to find out all these nuances of a 15 and a 16 and an 18, and we want that pleasure and we want that nuance. So therefore, that's what we chase. It's not just a means to, this is now drinkable, put it in the bottle. We want to go beyond that, and that's fine. But so it's a good question to ask whether we want to do it, and absolutely we do.
Great. Any more questions at this point?
So those two rums, that you just tasted, 43 and 46. So 43 is the traditional proof in Barbados. It was actually once upon a time the law, the minimum proof. It's got to protect the consumer. Really comes from the UK standard, 25 degrees below UK proof, works out at 42.9. That's where this odd number of 43 comes from. You might probably wonder, where does 43 come from? And it literally comes from this, you know, this random 25 below UK proof. So when we first came to the UK, we actually, you know, rum was very cheap, and we were told, you know, if you go above 37.5, you're going to get a great price disadvantage because of the taxes, etc., etc. So here we were with this 43% Dorleys. So we compromised at 40. And so initially Dorleys in the UK was sold at 40%, which is not what it was originally sold at in Barbados. So, you know, one of the beautiful things of rum doing better now and being more respected and not necessarily quite so price sensitive, we decided to return Dorleys back to the traditional proof. So now the Dorleys XO and the Dorleys 12 are 43. RL Seale, no, RL Seale, we didn't switch RL Seale to 40. We sold for RL Seale originally at 43 because we said, no, this is our premium, this is our prestige, it's got our name on it, we're not going to compromise it for the UK market. However, with us sort of having the plan to return Dorleys to 43, we then decided, well, we should try to find some way to make the RL Seale, you know, RL Seale was going to lose that little bit of distinctiveness of the 43. So we actually broke with a historic tradition of 43 and changed the RL Seale to 46. And that's why we wrote things on it like export proof, because we kind of wanted to communicate that this really was not the, you know, the historic Barbados proof, but something we'd done for the export market. So that's how those two ended up at 46 and 43. And the reason why I mentioned that little proof discussion is because it leads into Dorleys 14 at 48. So why 48? Well, if you look back in history before things like heavy taxation and government regulation and stuff, blenders generally did between about 44 and 48%. And they did that because they were balancing profit and flavor. So if they bought their casks in and they diluted them more, obviously that's more profit, more bottles. But if you went too low, you really damaged the spirit, the quality of the spirit. Because when you change proof in a spirit, it's not just dilution. You're actually changing the character of the spirit because of the way that the components are soluble in alcohol or water. So you actually change the spirit. So when we decided to do Dorleys 14, the most premium version, we decided almost to just kind of start fresh, if you like. So there was no legacy to 43. We just simply did it at the proof that we found most desirable. So we didn't worry about pricing, tax. We just chose a palatable, what we thought was a really palatable proof, which protected the rum, protected the flavor of the rum, but was, you know, relatively palatable. Not everyone wants to drink cask strength. So that's where 48 came from. So please go on and have a bit of Dorleys 14 and enjoy it at 48, which is really a proof I really don't like to go below. So, you know, the other two are kind of a historic legacy of you know, the past, but the Dorleys 14 is kind of me being able to say, no, I'm starting afresh, and I'll do this at the proof I want to do it at. Now, Dorleys XO, we use sherry cask, and in Dorleys 14, we use Madeira cask. Now, it's very important to understand we don't do a finish. We don't do a secondary maturation. We have rums in Dorleys 14 that are either aged 14 years in ex-bourbon cask or 14 years in ex-Madeira cask. Yeah.
Yeah, can you maybe elaborate a bit on what the finish is and why you don't do finishes and, versus?
So finishes is something that's become fashionable where you age, you know, rum or whiskey, and then you put it into a second cask. And the second cask is such a short time that you call it a finish. You know, 6 months or something like this. I'm not really a big fan of finishing. We do a finish in Dorley's XO, but in the context in Dorley's XO, you know, we do a minimum 5 years in bourbon and then another year minimum in sherry. So it's in context, you know, it's another 20% more, but I'm not really a fan of, you know, 10-year-old rum and then you say you put it 6 months in another cask. I think that's a bit gimmicky. And I think it kind of raises the suspicion that you've simply used that other cask for some residual liquid in that cask, really, than a genuine maturation. So maturation is a super slow process. And so it's very hard to take a sort of creditable account of a short time. It seems gimmicky to me. So whenever we've used the cask, as I said, when we went back to use things like sherry casks or, you know, Madeiras and stuff, it was just a return to the principle of using refill casks. So it was not about, as I say, finishes. It was more about proper maturations. We did start with a lot of them as secondary maturations because it was a kind of a safe and cautious approach. But by the time I got explored into Madeiras, I went straight into full maturations with Madeiras. And I just treat it as a you know, a good, excellent cask. So it's not about a secondary maturation. It's not about a finish. The whiskey show coming up, I'm going to be showing some rum aged 4 years in a wine cask, and then actually transferred into an ex-bourbon cask. And it's been in the ex-bourbon cask for 9 months. It will stay in the ex-bourbon cask for much longer. So again, it'll be a double maturation. But just to kind of throw this whole notion on the head about finishing, this has actually spent the first 4 years in the wine cask and then gone into the, you know, an older American oak cask. So it's really about using the wood, you know. So there you go.
I have one question from Andrew. I think Andrew is really out there to get all the releases going, and in the UK, I think Andrew is from. And do you have more rum in port casks?
I have lots of rum in port.
Great question, Andrew. I was waiting for that one as well.
Yeah, I have rum. So when you hear about rum, port casks and sherry casks, many of these casks are what we call seasoned casks. So most of the sherry casks are seasoned casks. So what do I mean by a seasoned cask? Well, the cooperage will go and buy a cask that has been used in, you know, different wines, and then seasons it with sherry, or they might buy a brand new cask, seasons it with sherry, not actual sherry from a, you know, that's going to make Solera sherry, and then sells that cask. Very rarely you can have a cask that comes out of a sherry Solera, or you can have a port cask that comes out of a port Adega. So it was an actual port cask. And so when you get these casks, these will be decades old. I do actually have, besides my seasoned port cask, I do actually have some actual, I have 10 port pipes that came out of a sherry, out of a port Adega. So these are decades old casks. I also have some very, very old sherry Solera casks, and again, they're like minimum 40, 50 years old. I mean, when you get them, like the bungs are all worn, and I mean, you can tell they're just years and years old. So yes, I have lots of more rum and port casks, including some very, very interesting port casks as well.
Right. So you just mentioned a 4
year. I even have, when you mentioned finishes, because I'll give you one it's quite amusing. So I have some buddies in cognac, and you know, cognac guys they're pretty conservative. So, and they're pretty proud of their own stuff, which they should be. So what they did is they bought some port casks for a finish of their cognac, which is legal in cognac because you can use a wine cask. So they took their cognac, and I can't remember how old the cognac was, but they put it in a port cask. But they only put it in the port cask about 2 or 3 months. It's quite funny. I mean, it's just because I think it's one of those cases where marketing says you have to do it, but the guys, the producers, their heart's really not in it. So it's like, we'll put it in the port cask, but we're going to get it out of there as fast as we can. Anyhow, I have those port casks now. So I have some port casks that had a bit of cognac in them for a while. So that's quite. I hope I consider them just bloody port casks because the cognac in them was in them so small. But luckily, yeah. So there's some friends of mine in the cognac business that were like, "We got these casks. Would you like them?" "Yes, please. I'll take them."
Yeah, so it's a good thing you don't have a marketing department that makes you do these kind of gimmicky.
Yeah, it's so funny. I mean, I got approached when I went to Whiskey Show last time. I got approached by a pretty high up blender, and he was like, "Can we get your rum casks? You know, to age whiskey and finish whiskey in?" And I said, "Yeah," because it was pretty. You know, they didn't want many. And he said, "But can we put your name on our whiskey?" I said, "Yeah, of course." "Yeah, good. Marketing will be happy." So I could tell that this guy could give a shit about putting his whiskey in a rum cask. Okay, he really wasn't that fussed.
No, it was important.
And right, he should be. His whiskey is perfectly beautiful. It doesn't need to be in a rum cask.
Yeah.
But you know, it was basically, you know, guys, we have to innovate. You know, and so he was like, "Well, sell me some rum cask." Yeah, I'll sell you some rum. So there you go.
You actually don't do that. So it must have been a good friend of yours, because I know you actually don't sell your casks.
We did. So what happened this year, we sold a few. First time, yes. No, I shouldn't say first time. We did 2 years ago. We did a little swap with some whiskey producers. A good few years ago now. It's a really long time ago. And this year, because we were building a new cooperage and we were making a set, you know, we were really scaling up what we going to reach our. So we needed to, you know, improve our cooperage facilities, so, you know, I did my calculations kind of thing, because older casks are a very important part of our aging program, and I basically realized I could spare some. So we actually this year, for the first time, released some. Yeah.
Yeah.
A question here: can casks of any kind actually be reused? After, yeah, of course, because rum doesn't have a requirement doesn't have any prohibition on refill casks. So and that's actually quite important, because and whiskey does this as well, of course. So you can have your first fill on a sherry cask and then your second fill. So something like Dorley's 14 is using a first fill of the Madeira cask. But rum, like when we released, for example, something like Principia, that was all multiple filled sherry casks. So none of the rum that was produced when we bought the Principia came from a sherry cask that was a first fill. Yeah, so, you know, if there was any liquid in it, it was rum. So yeah, so that's an important part of our program as well. Criterion was all refill Madeira casks. Yeah. So Criterion, if you remember, was a double maturation, but the Madeira casks that were used in the second maturation were all refill Madeira casks. So their last fill was rum, not Madeira.
So quick question about the you just mentioned a 4-year-old rum you're gonna sample at the whiskey show. Is that the pot still rum?
Yes. So yeah, so the seminar is on wine cask maturation.
Yeah.
And so I got invited to participate in that, and they asked me obviously to bring a sample. Mm-hmm. So we sent it on. So that's it's 4 years. 4 years in a Syrah French oak wine cask. and then 9 months and counting in refill ex-bourbon cask.
And are you planning on releasing this under your own label? Because you haven't done so as of yet.
Oh yes, I mean this is still a very young rum. Obviously, it's only coming up. It'll be 5 years in December. But yeah, I mean it's the earliest that would get released will be 10 years old.
Okay. Okay.
So how's the feedback on the Doherty's 14? I mean, does everyone really enjoy the proof?
Yeah.
Lots of flavor, but not too high a proof. I mean, I don't know how many cask strength geeks I have in here, but who probably think bring it on. But that's the idea behind the Doherty's 14. The Doherty's 14 is just to sort of free yourself of those commercial constraints. I mean, obviously it costs more than XO or RL Seale, but it's a kind of rum that would have been hard for us to create 10 years ago because we wouldn't have felt there was a market for it. Of course, we didn't have 14-year-old rum 10 years ago, but it was probably a rum even we wouldn't necessarily envision because one of the challenges people ask sometimes do we do things a lot differently today? We don't do a lot of things differently, but what we do have is the opportunity to do things that we didn't do last time in terms of what we can bring to market. So, we always had the ability to make an old rum of 48%, but to sit down and actually go for it, keep the rum, release it, you had to know you had a market for it. So it would have been very hard to have done this, say, 10 years ago. You would have felt it would, not have sold very well. Now it's no problem. There's a market space for this kind of rum. It's good. It's great.
So what do we think, guys? Any comments? Let Richard know what you think of his latest Dorleys. Nope. Everyone's drinking. So Richard, I heard somewhere that actually it was your father who decided or nudged you towards aging rums back in the day. Is that a true story? Is that something I recall?
No, I think you just heard that slightly different. So basically, when we acquired the Doherty's brand, and the Doherty's brand was a lot more prestigious than us. So at the time that we bought the Doherty's brand, kind of the oldest rum we were selling was 2 years old. And when we bought Doherty's brand, we bought some stock, and the oldest Doherty's rum was doing is 5 years old. But even then, if you haven't got a lot of stock, 5 years is, and if you want to grow a brand, you got to have stock. If you're selling a 5-year-old rum, at any point in time, you have to have 5 years worth of stock at whatever sales level it is. And I don't think people realize how much stock you need vis-a-vis. I mean, if you're selling a 10-year-old rum, you need 10 years of stock. And this is why, I think this is why some people are very easily fooled with bogus age statements, and they just show a small building and here's 20 or 30 casks. This is where my 10-year-old or 15 or 20-year-old rum comes from. I'm sorry, it doesn't work like that. We're one of the biggest rum stocks in the whole region, and you need to be if you want to sell old rums. So what happened when we purchased that? We had to make the decision to make an investment. So yeah, no, my father's key role was basically backing the investment or being willing to make the investment. I think from him, it was a pretty straightforward business decision in the sense of, he saw that you got a better return with older rum. I mean, it made sense. Yeah, so I think I don't think it was a question of him telling me to age rum, but I think it was more a question that he was the one willing to make the investment. Because at any day, obviously, he's the boss and controlling the purse strings. So, if he wasn't willing to commit to that, then we wouldn't have had the rums, So that was a big, and I think, as I say, I don't think people realize how that's not an easy commitment. And that's why I tell you that time is probably one of the most important factors in creating good rums. And it sounds like the easiest thing to do, but when you look at most people, it's actually the hardest thing to do. A lot of people not prepared to make a commitment. I remember, to give you the story, when I was approached to do 10 Keen, they said to me, you know, like, what's the youngest you think you could sell a premium rum for? And I must have said something like 2 years or something like that. And they said, well, could you do it at 6 months? And of course, they ended up releasing a 6-month product, and we know how well that went.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting story, and I'm sure they probably don't like me talking about it, but they spared no expense in every single other area. Every single other area, no expense was spared to make this rum, except the most important one of all, which was to invest in agent stock. That was the area that they could compromise, so they compromised it. And yeah.
So I have a question where so people like the especially the Madeira influence of the 14-year, and I have a question from Andrew again, oh yeah, that's a nice one. I was going to ask another question, but let's take this one first. How does the Real McCoy fit in your range actually? Can you elaborate on the partnership you have with Real McCoy?
So Real McCoy is a partner brand. So we do that. We did that partnership mainly because Real McCoy wanted to have a very quintessential Barbados rum. So it really fit with us. But I'll leave Real McCoy to talk about Real McCoy when we can. Let's get back onto the Foursquares, because now we're onto the vintages. Now we're on the cast strength. So again, feel free, like the first set, open up the 08 and the 09, put them next to each other if you feel free. So when we first decided to release rums under the Foursquare brand, my original idea was to do vintages. And the idea really is I didn't want to create another regular brand of rum, you know, permanent SKU. And I always liked the idea of doing, having a dynamic part of the portfolio. I was always jealous of my wine friends that, you know, we in the spirits world tended to be very obsessive about consistency. So we would be very obsessive, you know, the RL Seale 10-year-old is the same every year. And the wine guys got to sort of express themselves a little bit more with a vintage. And so that was the original idea with doing the Foursquare releases, was as a vintage. And then eventually, not very long after that, was, you know, the fact that I was developing some different casks. We thought, well, we would do the different releases under the Foursquare label. But the vintages are the core, if you might say, the core of the ECS, and what they do is they represent the core of what we do. So they're meant to be, you know, pot column blends, you know, ex-bourbon, which is sort of the backbone of a Barbados rum in the modern era. Well, American white oak goes back 300-400 years in Barbados rum making. Well, not quite 400, but close. Because we always historically got white oak staves from, you know, New England, Canada. So this is really the sort of quintessential modern Barbados style. And as I say, the core of what we do at Foursquare. So it was doing this 100% bourbon cask, pot column blend, 12 years old, which is a nice, good set level of maturity. It was a kind of a very good way to express the vintage. In other words, to express the sort of annual changes. You couldn't really express the vintages, you know, with where you're using different casks or whatever. So it's a good way for us to kind of evolve. You know, we can kind of shift and change the vintages as the style the market likes. So yeah, I mean, that's so, you know, and so we've had great fun with people, you know, having different opinions on the different vintages. But the idea too is that they're also kind of a safe place. So, you know, I may come out with, you know, Red Tab, and maybe you don't like Madeira cask, or you know, I come out well with sherry. Maybe you don't like sherry casks or something. So the idea with the ECS is to have a kind of a core that's kind of dependable and reliable. So even though you might have 08 and 09 in front of you, and you can have a, you know, great fun picking out the differences, the idea really is they're in the same wheelhouse, and if you love one, you would hardly dislike another one. You might have a preference, but so that's where we are with the vintages. So please enjoy. And of course, we're now into cask strength. The cask strength gets to show off one of the key elements that we like to do, or key elements that we like to say is about Foursquare rums, which are, we try to make rums that are very soft and very well balanced. And I think that's best expressed in cask strength rums. I think today, sometimes we don't get the respect for aging because we're drinking all watered down spirits. You know, everyone's drinking 40% spirits. And I think some of the appreciation of what aging does is lost. But when you drink cask strength spirits, you really know the impact of aging. Because if I give you a young spirit cask strength, you will, you know, find it significantly more harsher and unpalatable. And that's where the 12 years comes in, because we think, you know, I think 12 years, not that it, you know, couldn't age more, but at 12 years, it really becomes really nice and round and really nice and soft and really, really very palatable.
So there's a question, if you have a favorite between the 08 and the 09 from memory. It's like,
no, I never have any
choosing between your children, I think. But
so the pot column blending basically is both. So we blend before bottling. So all of the cask is, and then of course we make the blend after aging. So at that time, you know, that you are blending rums that are either column predominant or pot predominant. So you're still doing it basically at the end of a pot column blend, because that's kind of so historically they were aged separately and blended at the end. And so you know, your tradition was to blend what you call the 100% column rum and 100% pot still rum. We sort of still mimic that in either blending very column heavy rums or very pot heavy rums. So it's still you know, blended at the end, but every cask is pre-blended. Do you see a larger quantity? Not in the short term. Obviously these things take time, but you know, the success of Foursquare has meant that we are able to invest in more stocks today, last 2-3 years, than say we did 10 years ago. So, you know, obviously, yes, we'd like to grow the ECS range, but it won't be anything in the short term. So, you know, you can expect the ECS to continue around these levels for at least the next 2, 3, 4 years easily. I mean, we have good stocks. We have to make decisions. We never sell out everything. So, you know, that's one of the challenges of what to release, what to keep. That's one of the challenges of doing the ECS. But we very rarely would use up. So for example, you know, I had the earlier question of détente, a port cask. Well, I have more of the port cask that went into détente because we made a conscious decision to release some of them into the blend of détente, and a conscious decision to keep some for further aging. And so that's the same thing that happens. So we release, you know, I haven't bottled every single cask. I have a 2009 rum. Some rum is kept to go on to be a future, you know, a future Shibboleth or a future Nobility or something like that.
So as of, I think last year, maybe 2 years ago, you started distilling sugarcane juice. Can you tell us about the
so I have a few, so what I did is I have a few pictures on some of the new stuff because it's the new stuff. So what I'm going to do is I should be able to go to share screen. And what I'm going to do, okay, let's see. If I do that,
I can see your screen. Yep.
And I make that full screen. Okay, can people see the things I'm sliding?
Yes.
Right, so there's a big load of cane arriving at Foursquare. So all of our cane comes in. It's not from Foursquare plantation, but from another plantation on the island that hand cuts cane. So we clean it up first before it goes in the mill, because when it arrives, you can see there's a lot of leaves and trash and stuff on it. But when we clean it up, ready for the mill, and we have two types of mill. So that's a classic triple roller mill. So one tandem, and then we go into our screw press. So when you go in a sugar factory, the mill will be, you know, 3 or 4 or 5 stations crushing the daylights out of the cane. What we do is we try to do basically equivalent of a first press. I'm sure you've heard that term, first press, with things like virgin olive oil. So the idea really is to have a good balance between reasonable amount of extraction but good quality juice. So what we do at Foursquare is we do slightly more extracted than a one press. So we go through the first mill, one press, get a lovely juice, and then we do this second squeeze with a screw press, which is the more gentle squeeze. And we do that on the chopped cane. So the juice at Foursquare is pretty unique. This is what the screw press looks like, and that's what the juice looks like when it's flowing. These are actually videos, but on the PDF I'm sharing, it's just frozen things. And then the juice goes to our juice fermentation area. So we have a molasses fermentation area in the south, and we have a juice fermentation area in the north. The molasses fermentation is all added yeast. The juice fermentation is all natural fermentations. Okay, so this area actually smells absolutely spectacular during the season, because with the added yeast fermentations, molasses, they're very vigorous, produce lots of carbon dioxide, so they're all closed, whereas these are kept open, and so lovely, because the fermentation is very slow. In fact, I think I have a picture here of some bubbles. Actually, this is also a video that's frozen, but that's a bubbling very slow. So it actually bubbles really slowly. Sorry, you don't have a video. And we also produce some high ester rums. So here is a really silly high ester rum of 1900. That's ethyl acetate. When I started to do these rums with cane juice again, or even when Larry before me, people didn't realize that back in the day, large amounts of juice was used in Barbados rum. Today, people tend to think that rum is made either from juice or molasses. Historically not correct. On the sugar estate, both went into it. But in fact, Barbados in the late 19th century was so famous for its molasses that rum makers would use a sparing amount of molasses as they could. And they would use low sugar yielding cane to make rums from cane juice. So rums from cane juice in Barbados is very prevalent. And they also made some high ester rums as well, which you can see described here. These are extracts from the 1908 Royal Commission on Potable Spirits, where they took evidence from people from all around the world in spirit making. And so here they talk about the slow fermentation type. So that's the slow fermentation, low alcohol, higher ester rum. So you can see them described, which may be of higher ester content, well-marked flavor. And they say the primary, as we know, the primary representative of the first type is Jamaica. The second type, which is the normal rum that we associate today, is Guyana. But they submit that both these rums have equal right to name rum. So that was actually a debate whether high ester rum and rum were both rums. But they mentioned certain grades in Barbados belong to a certain slow fermentation type. So yeah, that's one of the things that we wanted to restore, was the cane juice making. This is actually our field at Foursquare, which we will be planting our own cane this year. But right now, all of our cane comes from plantation in the center of the island. This is our new pot still. It's actually all connected up. We're about to commission it. But this is the new, so at Foursquare, we have one column still, one pot still. We will now have two pot stills, and the second pot still is larger than the first one. But it's the classic pot double retort design. It's got some clever features though, which we have on our existing stills, but this is the first still we've been able to do it from the ground up. So this is a development of a new type of copper surface, which basically has an improved catalytic effect. So that's a little bit described there. And our name is mentioned as helping in the research. I can assure you our role is very small. There's a new control system on the pot still. So our pot still, very much in the sort of our style is to, you know, we're doing the classic double retort system. We're doing everything we can to execute it as well as possible. So including, you know, pretty sophisticated control and monitoring. This is actually needed because one of the things we're going to do is we're going to run our pot still on the vacuum. So it'll be the first rum still anywhere in the world, first rum pot still anywhere in the world to run under vacuum pressure. So that means instead of running at atmospheric pressure, in the entire you know pot inside of the pot will be sub-atmospheric pressure. So that lowers the boiling points of all the components inside.
Yeah, so
the other thing that we're sorry.
One question, Richard. So I had a question about the new pot still. Is it just it's not just making more rum, right? Because you want to age more rum. It's also getting different marks. It's a whole different kind of still because of the.
Well, no, the different marks are really driven at the fermentation level, so not really at the thing. So yeah, no, the primary purpose with the pot still will be obviously to make more pot still rum. Because we're having more demand for our higher end rums, we have to increase our capacity of our pot still rums. If we were having more demand for the lower end rums, then it wouldn't be, you know, so our ratio has changed because the higher end is growing more and more and more. So therefore, the ratio between how much pot we make and how much column we make has got to change because of the portfolio of what we're selling. It's not that the rums are changing in their ratios. It's just that we're selling more of the pot still influenced rums. So yeah, so the primary reason, but one of the things we were able to do is to take all of the learning that we've had in the, you know, over the 25 years and build that learning in a pot from scratch. So it's not that the old pot doesn't have some of these features too, it's just that they were adding on. Whereas in this pot, we're able to literally start from, you know, ground zero and design everything with no compromise. So that's been really good. That's
the taste will be different, right? The new made spirit will be different than the first pot.
That's a good question. The vacuum one should be different. We'll see. But you know, you can always adjust, and you know, when you say it's different, you know, it all depends how you run your still, your cuts. I mean, the beautiful thing about pot stills they're not like column stills or stills that are literally designed to work within a particular range. The beautiful thing about pot stills is that there's a lot of flexibility over the type of spirit that you make.
Yep.
There's a much broader range now. You know, pot still may never be able to make a rum as light as the column still, but there's a broader range within each design of what it can do. So yeah, so there's not a, you know, sort of one defined output. And this is the other thing that we do, which is the recharring cast. So this is really quite fantastic because you're taking really old casks, so you're talking about wood that's really beautifully seasoned and recharring it. So it's really quite superior to an original oak cask that's newly charred. So a new oak cask, they're generally air seasoned to try to make them more palatable and less aggressive. Here you don't need that. These are very old casks, and you char them, and so you penetrate into new wood. You create a new charred layer. but you don't have some of the unpleasantness from a brand new oak barrel. And you also do have some influence from the former content. So the results are really quite extraordinary. So this is something that we're hoping to expand that we've only been doing on a small scale, and we hope to do it bigger. And I say, when I say do it bigger, it'll still be done. This is really, you know, that's 100% natural fire. There's no gas. You know, I mean, I see some places do these things, and you know, they go in with a gas-driven torch, and it's like, come on. No, that's 100% natural fire. That's actually oak staves there burning that fire. So this is really, so again, manual process, slow, relatively slow, but the results are absolutely spectacular.
But why was this important to you? Is it from a historical perspective, or just, you know, you have the cask, you want to, you know?
Yeah, so the cask obviously is a very, very important part of rum of your spirit development. So by doing a rechar cask, you have some control obviously on that layer. Obviously you can choose what oak you want to use. Right now we're just using American white oak. So you have, it's one more parameter which you have some control of. But by using these very old casks, which of course have taken a lifetime to create, so you know that you're looking there at a cask that's probably 20, 25 years old. So you know you couldn't do this 20, 25 years ago if you didn't have the cask. So you know now you have the library of casks, you can think about doing these things. So it's really a question of you know, doing it because you have the desire with the different cask options, but you have these casks, you have the raw material to work on, if you like.
Yeah.
As I say, we've just built a cooperage, so we will, you know, because with this you take off the tops and so we'll recooper this whole cask, we'll put some new hoops on, things like that. So we'll basically make a refurbished cask in our new cooperage.
So I saw a quick picture of the yeast again. Someone asked, Jeff, I think, was, are you using one type of yeast or do you experiment?
So in the molasses fermentation, we use one type of yeast. In the natural fermentation, of course, there's a whole spectrum of yeast in there being used.
Okay.
So I'm going to stop the share now.
Yep.
So I should have returned.
Yes, you have.
And now you have Shibboleth.
Yeah. So what do we think about the 2008, 2009? I will ask you at the end. I will do a quick poll on your favorite rums, but any comments as of now? I mean, for Richard to do some more homework. So what I found interesting about, again, the story of when you bought Foursquare and decided to make the investment to age rum, and I mean, the vision of you know, selling aged rum at a certain point, because I think it's in 1985 that started with Elaine Arthur rum, I think. Am I correct?
No, we purchased Alinath in '93, but of course we had stocks.
Yeah.
So we purchased stock, yeah.
Yeah, but the release, the 1985 release.
Correct, and that was based on stock that we purchased in '93. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So, but then even then the label was similar or kind of going on to the ECS labels a bit. So it's nice to it baffles me that, you know, when you start, you had that vision of, you know, this is what we're gonna do, and yeah, well, came to fruition in the last a number of years, and has been great for you guys, because like I said in my opening, I think you've won every single award at every prestigious award show that you could have won. Supreme Champion even, which was never done before. So a number of people said the 2008 hard to pick between the favorites, to pick between them. Yeah, okay. So okay, the last one, Richard, go ahead.
So Shibboleth, so it'd be nice to taste Shibboleth after the vintages, because, you know, one of the things that we wanted to do with Shibboleth was to kind of surprise people because, you know, when they think 16 years, they're expecting, well, oh, rum doesn't age 16 years, or it's going to be woody. And so we tried to make it much more distillate driven. So it will probably be a less wood forward than the vintages, and more on the creaminess, more on the fruitiness, more on the softness. So those elements of aging, because I want to sort of get people to stop thinking that age just means wood. Age can mean fruit. Age can mean softness, creaminess, mouthfeel, all of these things. And so that's what Shibboleth is about.
So while everyone is enjoying that one, I still have a couple of questions. If no one else has any questions, I hardly doubt that, but okay. Oh, there's one question now. Do you have a lineup for future names? Do you think about them yourselves, or you can read the chat for yourself? That's I think it's a valid question.
I didn't see that question in the chat.
How do you? Oh, okay. At the bottom. So, do you have a lineup for future names? Do you think about them yourself? So, actually, the question is, how do you come up with these names? Family or friends? And can you call the 20-year-old Amsterdam? Okay. Now, I'm pretty sure the answer to that is no. But
yes, I come up with the names, and the names sometimes inspire the rum, and sometimes the rum inspires the name. But yes. So Shibboleth was because Shibboleth is kind of like, so on the back label we write, it's a Barbados rum only if and only if it's aged in Barbados. So the Shibboleth is kind of like the true identity of a Barbados rum. And the true identity of a Barbados rum is a rum aged in Barbados. And sometimes when we have this discussion about a true Barbados rum or a true Jamaican rum, we really get, you know, the sort of nonsense about, you know, aged in Europe and all this thing. And one of the great falsehoods is the notion that rums were historically aged in Europe. This is actually totally not true. It's actually quite a modern phenomenon. So, you know, we have this idea that, you know, there's something natural or normal about a rum aged in Europe. This is not correct. And so my Shibboleth is that, you know, the true identity of a Barbados rum is aged in Barbados. And so I thought one of the best rums to sort of boast about that would be a rum that would surprise people, wouldn't be, because I think people tend to think aging is wood, and I don't want people to think that at all. I mean, one day I may come out with a 16 or 17, 18, and maybe a really wood forward rum, and the guys who love wood forward rums will love it. But I wanted to make sure my first foray into 16 was an eye opener. And it's a rum you need to spend a little bit of time with because it's quite complex. It needs to be open a little bit. So it's not necessarily the greatest rum for a tasting. You know, I think a lot of people, they certainly like it when they start because they keep drinking it, but they, you know, I get a lot of people come back to me and say, you know, by the time I sort of were into my, you know, third glass of Shibboleth, and then is when I really fell in love, you know. So that, you know, so that's fine. I mean, that's always the challenge with making, you know, finding that balance between palatability and complexity, because you can make a really, really complex spirit and then it's not so palatable. So then, you know, you maybe chase someone who maybe doesn't want to invest the time to have the palatability, to sort of, you know, get their head around it. So that's always a trade-off. It's always a challenge to find the right line.
So you mentioning a true Barbadian rum, I think it's a nice segue for a question I have on the GI, if you would allow us.
Sure.
So there's so for some people who have read some things on social media, Barbados is looking forward to having a GI implemented, GI geographial indication, PGI actually, like for instance Scotch whiskey. There's a draft even, but well, the West Indies So where it is from distilleries is is backtracking or sabotaging or whatever you want to call this the current concept. So can you tell us maybe, Richard, in your own words, because you're involved in this whole process, so why a GI is so important? You mentioned some of these things already, but maybe elaborate on.
So a GI, yeah, I mean, I think it's important to understand why a GI is important, because I don't think people necessarily know why a GI is important. Or, you know, those who oppose a GI will feed them the wrong reasons. You know, they'll, you know, feed them stuff. Well, a GI is about, you know, standardizing or controlling or whatever. A GI is about protection. That's, you know, that's the main thing of what it's about. The GI is analogous to your own trademark. So, you know, if you export, you know, if I export Foursquare Rum to the EU, I'm going to register that trademark, Foursquare. Why? Because I'm going to invest in my brand, and you know, I want to protect my investment by making sure that all the revenue from the name Foursquare comes back to me. If I don't register my trademark, and somebody comes along and sells a Foursquare rum, and it's not from Foursquare, it means I'm losing out on the revenue. And even more worrying, if it's not up to the standard, it may then damage the value of my brand. Well, the GI is identical to that, but it's for, instead of it being for the trademark, it's for the country. So when you go to the EU and you say register Barbados rum, you're asking for a protection that I think people think is there, but it's not there. So people think that when you go into a store and you buy a product called Barbados rum, that it's 100% Barbados rum. There's nothing to tell you that. There's nothing to assure you of that. You are purely at the mission of the producer. Moreover, you have things like EU provenance rules. So provenance says that you can, well, EU says you don't need to write where it's the origin. You can write the provenance, and the provenance can be where you think the product gets its essential characteristics. So you could import some alcohol from Panama to Dominican Republic, and you decide, hey, Dominican Republic is where it gets its mojo, so let's call it Dominican Republic rum. You wouldn't be breaking any law. EU trade rules have things like value-added accumulation rules. Now, these are very important for complex things. You know, suppose I built cars in Barbados, but to build this car in Barbados, I bought the engine in. So is it a Barbadian car? Well, there'll be complex calculations that said, okay, no, the engine is less than so much of the value added, so therefore it's a Barbadian car. And let's say we had a trade deal with the EU on Barbadian cars. So there are moves to have accumulation and value-added rules go to spirits. So that would mean that you could import some Barbados rum, and you could import some Panama alcohol, and let's say it was less than 15% or some figure in some trade deal, and you could label it Barbados rum. So you have this lack of protection. On the flip side now, you have this increasing value. So Barbados rum is not just something for 10 euro on a bottle anymore. There's Barbados rums for 50 euro, 100 euro, 150 euro. So you now have a very dangerous scenario, because you have a category that's increasing in value and an absence of protection. So how do you get that protection? You go to the EU and you say, Barbados rum is special. Barbados rum can only be made in Barbados. That's the nature of a geographical product. You're saying that the factory can't be anywhere else. So it's like the opposite of Coca-Cola or the opposite of many beers which are brewed all over the world. You're saying the factory has to be here. Otherwise, the product doesn't come out. So the EU has a mechanism for recognizing these products. And then once you recognize, they'll protect it. So they'll make sure that the product on the shelf is bona fide, and they usually carry a certifying mark from the producer. So what would happen is, as I say, right now, you could go in the store and pick up a bottle that says Barbados Rum, and you have no idea. If we got our GI, you would pick up that bottle of rum, and you'd see a mark on it, and it said certified geographical indication. A bit like, you know, Cuban cigars. So now you know I'm safe. I'm buying this product. It's the standard. So of course, to have a GI though, you have to have G. You have to say why this product can only be made in Barbados. And so you have things in there like Barbados water, you know, indigenous yeast and bacteria, aged in Barbados, because that's how you guarantee that this product that's in the bottle could only have been made there. Like you couldn't, like if you took Foursquare, you moved Foursquare and you set up the identical equipment over there in Holland, you and I know it would not come out the same rum. That's the essence of a geographically linked product. So that's what we're after. So we're after the protection, but to get the protection, you have to explain, well, what makes your product so special? So you can't have a scenario where you say, recognize my special Barbados rum, and then you say, well, what's special about it? Oh, it can be made from any cane, any water, any yeast, aged anywhere. What's special about it?
Yeah, so
the EU will say, bye-bye.
Yeah, so there's actually two steps.
Go away, stop bothering me.
Yeah, so the first step would be to have the GI implemented, right? And
yes, so the way it works, so GIs are established by treaties, so countries sign these mutual treaties. They create GI legislation in their home countries, and they're all pretty identical, the GI acts in each country. So what happens is you register the GI in your home country first, and then you go to the EU or wherever recognizes GIs. For example, the US does not recognize GIs, so you'll never be able to have GI protection in the US. So, you know, the sort of threat to GIs is the generic, is being generic. So in the US, it took many years for things like champagne and port to be protected, because the US said, no, those are generic words. Port's a generic name. So, and to this day, there are still California producers who have been grandfathered in, who can still use the word champagne or port. New producers can't. It's, you know, but that was a, you know, really grudging fight, because the US is generally not a supporter of geographical indications. The US, actually, I'll give you a funny one. Yeah, I'll give you a funny one. So I was making some pizza the other day, and my wife was out, and I said, you know, on your way home, pick up some mozzarella cheese. So when she came home, she came with this like bar of hard cheese. It said mozzarella cheese. I said, what the fuck? And then it says on it, Dutch Farms mozzarella cheese. So I said, oh shit, maybe this is some kind of Dutch mozzarella cheese, right? It's hard, it tastes nasty, which I thought, shit, because I thought Dutch, you know, this great cheese comes out of Holland. So then I look a little more carefully, and I see it's made by a company in Chicago, and the cheese comes from Wisconsin.
Of course.
So there is a country that needs GIs. I mean, I'm sure if I gave that to any Italian fella, they would have got a slap. But, you know, but horror of horrors, you know, my first inclination was, okay, fuck, this is not Italian mozzarella cheese. But because they use this Dutch Farms brand, I thought, okay, maybe the Dutch also make mozzarella cheese, and maybe they make it differently. So, I mean, now it had not only smeared the Italians, but it had smeared the Dutch as well, right?
Yeah, right.
It was only when I looked at the back and I said, oh, fuck, it comes from Wisconsin, which, you know, they do make some cheese as well, but
The dairy
they
state in the
stay
state.
away from mozzarella.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that, I mean, is a pretty good illustration of why the world goes to the trouble of protecting geographical products.
Yeah, I think we've seen rum agricole come out of the United States, right?
Yes, so in the US, for example, so agricole is a protected GI in one of the few rum GIs in Europe. So, you know, I couldn't label a product from Barbados agricole, even if I made it from cane juice, because that's not the only criteria to become agricole rum. And I couldn't label, you know, Foursquare agricole rum and ship it to the EU. I would be stopped, rightfully so. But I could do it in America. I could ship the bottles Foursquare agricole rum, no problem. It didn't even have to be from cane juice. I could sell molasses rum as agricole rum in America because they do not protect that term. And so, of course, you see loads of producers using the term because they know the term is associated with value. So people put it on, of course. So this is, you know, so geographical indications are taking that same protection that we automatically appreciate when it comes to brands. I mean, we know instinctively that, you know, you shouldn't use another person's brand. Well, it's the same principle, but applied to, and what it does is, again, remember with your own trademark, you're making sure all the revenue that's earned from your brand comes to you using your name. Well, it's the same thing with the GI. I mean, if you make sure that all of the Barbados rum is actually from Barbados, is aged in Barbados, is bottled in Barbados, what you're basically guaranteeing is that all the value added that the brand produces is done at home. And you know, the Caribbean is not in the financial position to share the value added of its products. And we do this in so many areas. I mean, the GI is not the only area in which these very serious discussions are coming about. They're coming about in things like cruise ship visitors. So cruise ships come in our islands, they wreck our reefs, they, you know, take our freshwater resources. They're, you know, they're parasites, and they give very little back. And you know, you have things like all-inclusive hotels. You know, they come in, they're basically selling on your name, your beach. They don't want to pay any taxes. You know, they come in to say, "We'll build a hotel, but we don't want to pay any taxes, no payroll tax, no VAT. They don't want to pay anything." And so this is you know, the rum GI is part of a much bigger story. What the islands are fighting for in the, you know, the sort of post-independence world, because, you know, people they are exploited, and they will be exploited, and they continue to be exploited, and it's a fight. So we're just one piece of a much bigger challenge.
Yeah, hopefully you will get it implemented soon, because if I think if I'm the last time I've read the EU regulation on spirits, I think there's a small paragraph on rum. This is what rum is supposed to be. And if you look at whiskey, then there's a whole, you know, section on American whiskey and Scotch whiskey, and everything is laid out, you know, definitively. So we could use a bit more regulation in rum, as you know, we pick up a bottle of Scotch. There are some friends of mine who work in a liquor store. You know, you buy Scotch, you know what it means to buy it.
Correct. And that's exactly what would happen once we got registered GIs. You would know. So you would know, yes. So if it wrote 20 years on the bottle, I mean, right now you guys know that, you know, you see a bottle of 20-year-old Jamaican rum, one of your first questions is that in Europe or is that back in Jamaica? And you know intrinsically, you're going to pay more if someone tells you it's 20 years in Jamaica. You're going to know, hey, that's more special.
Yeah.
So, you know, that fight shouldn't happen. You shouldn't have to have that game played. You should be able to know 20 years Jamaican rum, certified geographical indication. You know, you don't have to ask another question. And the same thing when it comes to adding things like sugar and flavorings and stuff like that. you need, you know, it's the law of the land in Jamaica. It's the law that you can't doctor Jamaica rum. So you want, and then, we're not as strong as Jamaica and have it in the law, but it's our custom not to doctor Barbados rum. But we'd love you to be able to go and pick up a bottle of Barbados rum and know once it says those words, Barbados rum, you don't have to then go and ask anybody. You don't have to go on a website. You don't do anything to know whether it had sugar in it or not. And it doesn't mean the Barbadian rum producer can't make sweetened rum. It's just that it's no longer Barbados rum geographically certified. You can make sweetened rum, you can make flavored rum, you can still make all those products, but it's not going to be certified Barbados rum.
Thanks for that explanation, Richard. I know it's a hot topic, and I do hope you guys, that the three of you, so Mount Gay, St. Nicholas Abbey, and Foursquare, push through and get this done as soon as possible. So the comments are great on the Shibboleth, as far as I can see. There's one question: do you have more private cask releases coming up? They're referring to the 15-year-old. I'm not sure if that's Richard.
No, not too many. Not too many. I mean, we do them. We don't do them as a matter of course. It really is. It depends. We've done some, more in East. We've done a couple in East Europe because we're really trying to develop rum there. Obviously, I did with Richard because he's been really, really great to us. So we'll have a few, but there's obviously it's pretty limited. I mean, the one that we will probably always do, which is very late this year, and there's some very good reasons behind that, is the one with the whiskey exchange. So there is one with the whiskey exchange coming. This year has been a crazy year. We've had COVID lockdown, we had a volcano shutdown, we had a hurricane. We just had mania this year, so we've it's disrupted some of the extraneous things. So we try not to let it disrupt the core activities, but it's meant that some of the private casts, these little one-offs, have had to sort of be delayed.
So what do you have anything planned in the next 3 months from your regular line of brands still?
So nothing, but the next ECS will come soon. That's the successor to Détente.
Okay.
So you'll hear about that soon.
But that'll be next year, right? Or
no, it will. Wow, it's amazing how slow
before we get our hands on it, it'll be next year.
Yes, I mean it's amazing. I mean, I shipped 2009 ages ago, and especially of course the UK now is just ridiculous. So Europe now seems to get their 09, get their ECSs before the UK.
Yeah.
But yes, these things take. It's I must have shipped the 2009 to Europe back in I must have shipped that back in about July or something.
I know you told me let's move this because we actually planned this to do this tasting in May or something like that, and you were wise enough to say let's push it backwards, then we'll make sure you get the 2009, and
yeah.
We're glad we did.
Yeah, well, I didn't want to have a situation too. You're tasting, say, 2008,
yeah.
And that's very hard to get, now, obviously, because it's been around. So yeah, it's better if you do the tasting with something you can go and buy.
Yeah. So there's a question that's actually, it also ties in with one question I have is, so what role does the Guardians of Rum have in protecting Barbadian rum in general, maybe? And what does it stand for? And the question I actually had was about categorization. So
the Guardians of Rum is just our little grouping of distilleries that, sort of honor those basic principles. It's just a sort of repository website where you can sort of see, here was sort of the list of the traditional distilleries that, follow these basic principles of aging at home and not doctoring with sugar and that kind of thing. So there'll always be a role. I mean, what we'd love is that there would that they wouldn't need to be a role. So, and in the future, yes, you know, if we get things like GIs established, and you know, Jamaica has a GI, and obviously Agricole is protected, and Barbados gets a GI, and well, Demerara's got a GI, which is actually a very good GI, except they, you know, allow sugar, but that's fine. You know, they do it, so therefore it should be in their GI. But yes, in a sense, you know, you wouldn't need a role for guardians if you've got, you know, well-established sort of identities. I mean, I've often explained it that way, in the sense that in the whiskey world, you automatically give a sort of level of credibility to the traditional producing regions, whereas in rum you don't. So what tends to happen is, you know, someone brings you a whiskey from, say, the Far East, you're automatically sort of skeptical of the standard, whereas someone could bring you, you know, a rum from the Far East, and that's, you know, say with glycerin and vanilla in it, and suddenly people think it's a premium rum, right? You couldn't pull that off with whiskey, because you have this sort of instinctive knowledge that the older traditional producers are the ones to be trusted. So what you would do with GIs is that those countries with GIs would then sort of elevate themselves, and you would then, the same way that you would think when you think whiskey and you think of the, you know, the famous whiskey producing countries, same thing would happen with rum. You know, this would take years, but you would think rum, and you would automatically think the best countries, Barbados and Jamaica, and then we wouldn't really give a shit about you know, making sure the poor consumer didn't get duped.
Yeah, you say it's we automatically with whiskey we automatically go to you make a distinction between a good whiskey and a bad whiskey, but I think whiskey have been working hard marketing wise to get there, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so the GI is one of those steps, because it gives you this foundation and this credibility, yeah, to then you know, distinguish yourself. Yeah. And you know, and if you're if you're a consumer and you go in the stores and you see, you know, the Barbados and Jamaica and Martinique, all, you know, with strong geographic identities, and you know, Martinique rum saying AOC and Barbados rum saying certified, you will then stand out right there to the consumer in an independent way, and in a objective way, you know. You know, right now we face a scenario where you can go in a store and, you know, Foursquare can be next to bamboo.
So it is in some places.
Yeah. You would not see Fireball next to Glenfiddich.
No.
So we need to achieve that. Yeah. Because, hey, the person who wants to drink bamboo, I don't really care about. The person who's drinking bamboo is not a Foursquare customer. It's not, you know, it's not a problem. The problem we have is when they think that's Barbados rum. Because the problem is not the guy who buys bamboo and likes it. The problem is the guy who buys bamboo and thinks Barbados rum is shit. Yeah. And that reminds me of that point where I often hear people say, well, you know, the sugar rums lead people into rum. But that's because no one counts how many people the sugar rums turned away from rum. So you need to see both sides of the balance sheet. Yeah. It's very easy to someone who's now, you know, core rum drinker, and they say, oh yeah, I started with whatever sugar rum. But what about all the people who tried a sugar rum and said, I'll never try and drink rum again?
Yeah, I consider it.
What are the guys, you know, who drinks bamboo and then says, you know, I tried Barbados rum and it was absolutely revolting.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually use the phrase or the analogy of you giving someone who doesn't drink whiskey an Isla whiskey for the first time, he probably won't drink whiskey again. So I think it's the same with a sugared rum maybe in that
Yeah,
case.
well, at least the Isla whiskey is a good quality product. I don't know if
Yeah,
this is a
okay.
good
Wait, but,
analogy at all.
yeah, no, okay.
That's like giving them Fireball,
No, okay,
and
flavor
then
wise.
they think, maybe they're, a
Yeah,
cognac drinker, and they've never had,
okay, fair enough.
this is an impossible scenario, but
Yeah.
imagine they're a cognac drinker and you want to introduce them to fine whiskey and you give them Fireball. And they say, no, thank you. I think I'll stick with my fine cognac.
Okay, fair enough, fair enough. Hey, about categorization, a number of years, this was a hot topic. It has slowed down a bit on social media, but you and Luca Gargano from Filiere, yeah, you proposed categorization for rum. Why can you tell us a bit what your proposal was and why it's so important?
So what we wanted to do really was to change the language around rum. So we needed to get away from color, and color was incredibly pervasive. You could see spirits would come out, and you read the chapter on rum, and the first thing, rum is divided into white, gold, and dark. And you would see, so books, you'd see articles, people write, dark rum is made in pot still. So when you have a nonsensical classification, then you end up with nonsensical information. So, and even things like the IWSC, spirit competition, and you sort of look at the whiskey, and they've got all the whiskey beautifully, single malts, blended, all separate. And then you go and see rum, and it's like white, dark, and golden. I mean, it's like, come on. So it was a very important conversation to have, to change the language in which rum is written about. And it's been great because, it still happens, but it's not the norm, and it gets called out. People don't really talk about white, golden rums, and certainly you wouldn't hear the enthusiasts. In other words, so like a group of you guys, we're going to talk about rum, and people are going to learn about rum from you guys. You're not going to talk about a white and a gold and a dark rum. So you're going to, just like you asked here, you're going to talk about things like pure pot still rums and blended rums. So we've changed that language, and it was very necessary, and it's good. I'm very happy with the outcome. But I think what's happening in rum is very dynamic at the moment. The education is very dynamic. So people are just like absorbing things like crazy, and it's really good.
Could you do a quick rundown of the categorization you guys proposed, real quick?
So it's basically, we talk about pure single rums, which are 100% pot still rums. So actually, one of the real motivations with the classification was for people to recognize that there were pure pot still rums out there, because when you look at the volume of spirits, the vast majority of spirits are made in column stills by volume. And so you have this wonderful rum category that has a nice chunk of rums that are made exclusively in pot stills and not appreciated, especially when you talk about junk of white, gold, and dark. I mean, when you have white rum, you're literally lumping Hamden in with Bacardi. And so one of the real backbones of what we were trying to do was to really shout and say, listen, there's a thing called pot still rum out there. So that was one category. And then the single blended category, because the other thing we kind of wanted to shout, which was directly related to that, is that there were only a handful of producers that are making pot and column blends. And that's not very common in any spirit. So about shouting about that. So and then we, so now you're left with the column stills. So we then said, right, okay, the column stills that make spirit, like the agricole and that, were traditional stills. So we made that distinction between this big multi-column, which we just called rum,
yeah.
or whatever. Yeah. So we had traditional, single blended, and pot still. So the mission, as I say, was really, it was not so much about classification, ironically. It was really about changing the language and making people aware of what we think are two very special categories, which are pot still and blended. And, you know, and we are a producer who only done a few limited pot still releases, but, you know, I could see the merit of bringing this to attention and how good it would be for rum. So even though we, you know, we didn't do 100% pot still and, you know, very limited, we know it was important. And, you know, and as Luca would say it to us, and he would say it to Appleton, and he'd say it to Mount Gay, and he'd say to us, he said, well, you guys have the ability to do it if you want in the future, the pure pot still. And yeah, absolutely, you're right. So there's no harm in us, you know, really talking about pot stills.
Yeah, no, I understand, and I completely agree with what you started off with, is that people tend to see color still as a matter of quality. So they automatically think that a brown spirit is...
Yeah, well, when you get a spirits book and it's written by, you know, a really recognized person, and it's, you know, it's on all spirits, and then you sort of get the chapter on rum, and you open it up and you say, and you see rum is divided into white, gold, and dark. I mean, you really cringe, and we really had to get past that.
Yeah.
Because then people then have to invent what those mean, because they don't have meaning. So then you start to see strange things like, you know, dark rums are aged more than gold rums, you know, or dark rums are made from molasses and gold rums are made from juice. I mean, that's the kind of nonsense that was written out there.
Yeah. And of course the fact that not all white rums are the same, and you get a whole different story on that as well. So okay, so those were my questions. I have a number of questions for Richard, but what about you guys? I saw that you guys really enjoyed the Shibboleth, but any more questions for our birthday man as of this point? Just unmute or put it in the chat. This is your chance to ask all the questions you have about your probably favorite rum now. Nope. That's it. Alrighty. So in that case, Richard, oh, happy birthday again. So Richard, again, thank you very much for taking the time on this day.
You're very welcome.
Oh, there's a nice question. Will you be having a special dram today, or taught in this case?
Well, they're all special.
Yeah, you have warehouses to choose from. So oh, there's a nice question. Maybe a lot of people won't know. This is a really inside question, inside information. What do you think about Maggie Campbell joining Mount Gay?
Well, at first I will tell you I was quite surprised, because it was just automatic for me to think that Maggie was looking for a role in the US. So it was a really nice surprise.
Yeah.
Yes, because I think people probably don't know that Maggie and myself and Gail are quite close. Maggie spent last Christmas with us. So it was really, so on a personal note, it was really good news for us, because they say Maggie and us are very close, and we spent time together anyway. So it was a nice, you know, so one, we were sort of waiting for Maggie to sort of land on her feet after Privateer. And so it was a kind of a, you know, it was a big surprise, but it was a nice personal surprise, because as I say, we're quite close. So I think it's great for Maggie, because Maggie has a very broad range of knowledge. So she's going to be like a really good resource that they can tap on. So, you know, fortunate for them. So no problem. I just have to work harder to stay ahead. That's all right.
Yeah, you have some stiff competition coming up, you know. even more.
Exactly. So yeah.
Great.
Keep me working hard.
Yeah, keep you on your toes and keep delivering the good stuff to us. Oh, again, Richard. Are you coming to the Rum Festival? I think they're talking about Richard Festival in October next month.
No, I had not made any plans. We had some difficulties here, but it's changing on October 4th. We had some difficulties here with the UK customs not recognizing our vax certificates. So in theory, if I turned up at the UK port, I would have to have quarantine. That's changing. but you know, I've already sort of decided not. I suppose with that change, I could make a late decision on UK Rum Fest, but I'll see. But basically, that wiped out any chance of me going to
Richard's Rum Fest.
yeah, and there's Whiskey Show this weekend, and there's Whiskey Live in Paris.
Paris as well, yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, I think it's gonna be next year before things kind of return to normal for me in terms of travel.
Yeah. So maybe a quick word about hopefully that will take place. What's the exact name? The Barbadian Rum Experience?
Barbadian Rum Experience, yes. First week of November, please come. What it is, it's basically a sort of week-long rum experience. So it's centered around visits to the distilleries plus seminars at the hotel. So there's a official hotel. You don't have to stay there, but if you stay there, you get the rate we advertise. All the seminars are there and all the transport's there. So but everything's, you book your own hotel, you book your own flight. The package that we sell on the island is either to attend the seminars or the seminars and the transport. So if you buy that package, then all your transport is included in all the seminars and all the trips. And there's some hospitality included in the package, some lunches and different things. But then other events that you can opt for. So there'll be, like some dinners and things like that you can choose or not choose. So the idea really is it's pretty flexible, but if you spend a week in Barbados, you will get to do all the tour of all the 3 distilleries. You'll get to spend lots of time with us, and you will get to attend lots of pretty informative seminars.
Yeah, I can definitely advise people to visit Barbados. I was lucky enough to visit Barbados in 2018, if I'm correct. Great island, the distilleries, amazing guests with Richard and Gail Seale. They hosted us really nicely, and it was a great experience. So I mean, I was planning on coming, Richard, in November, but yeah, I won't be able to make it.
Oh no!
No, yes, I'm sorry for that. Had to tell Gail still, but no, I was really planning on seeing you guys again, and especially, I mean, Foursquare is a really nice estate, but St. Nicholas.
First week of November.
Yeah, first week of November, Andrew. Starts the 1st of November, and the hotel, I think, is the Radisson. It's the hotel.
Yes.
Richard was mentioning, but would love to go back to St. Nicholas Abbey, sit on the they have a porch, a veranda at the back. It's such a nice estate. It's Barbados is awesome. Please do get there and do get a tour arranged. You will not be disappointed. I mean, you've joined this tasting, you obviously like Barbadian rum. And there's lots more to be ahead. So again, if there are no more questions, guys, I'm gonna end the recording now.